that basically he respects their right to be in the park and to protest and gather as long as they do it lawfully. They're still not sure where the city stands. He's been getting briefings from the police chief. My understanding is talking to people that know everybody involved is the mayor really doesn't like this kind of stuff. And wants the police chief to crack down and enforce the law.
What is the law?
All the city ordinances are park closed on this park closed. As far as putting up structures, changing the landscape, stuff like that, you need a permit to do that.
Do they have one? Why not? It doesn't sound like we really have a. We really don't have a. That's what it sounds like to me.
And you were talking to your blog, and you think that maybe they should get together and. So you're saying in your blog maybe there should be some kind of talk about it. How would that happen? How would you get the proper ordinance to deal with something like this?
The same way you do it normally. You know, these things are not run by the mayor or the police chief. These things were a rule of law. And if we don't have legislation from the city council which spells out the rights of individuals, it should be done on an ad hoc basis. Because all that's going to do is lead to more frustration and more cynicism. Because you have to treat every group the same. And when you do it on an ad hoc basis, you just do it on the fly, you're not going to treat every group the same. And so everybody's going to be frustrated. You need to look to the future. And so the way you do this is you have a city policy. But what I'm understanding is there's no city policy. Well, that doesn't make any sense. There needs to be a city policy. Certainly between the mayor, the city council, they ought to be able to come up with a policy on the rights of individuals under the First Amendment. That doesn't strike me as particularly difficult. Good.
Now, what about the liability issue? We've got clearly the landscape or the look of this park has changed dramatically. We've got boards, we've got pallets, we've got other stuff, safety hazards for people. Is the city liable if somebody falls over here? What's the story here?
Liability is a real issue for the people of this city because they have to pay. This is particularly true from what I understand is that you're really not supposed to be in this particular park after night. That's supposed to be the law. So the police chief and the mayor are what? They're just looking the other way? That just sets up a liability issue which doesn't help anybody. Look, people in this country have certain rights and those rights need to be spelled out. We're a system of laws, not an individual. So if you start doing it in an ad hoc way, you're just asking for trouble. You're asking for everybody to be more frustrated, not less frustrated. And that's what they're setting up.
Okay. Now, you were mentioning earlier that when you do it ad hoc like that, some other groups could demand to have the same. And you couldn't. I mean, where does that lead you?
Well, just think of all the other groups that might say, well, you know, we want to encamp in Kanawha at night. You can think of the groups that you don't like. This isn't a question of allowing people you may like to stay here and keep people you don't like out. That's not what we do. That's not the First Amendment. We need a policy for everybody. And that's the only way to do it. When you allow politicians to just make decisions on an ad hoc basis. These people have rights, those people don't have rights. We've been through this in this country. So I'm not particularly satisfied with the way the situation is being handled by the mayor or the way the situation is being handled by city council. This needs to have a uniform policy so the people of Richmond understand what their rights are.
Okay, for a long time they've had a policy against people sleeping in the parks or even on the streets. You have to be sitting up, you can't be laying down, you can't sleep in the parks. But clearly by allowing them to stay here, they're saying that policy, I guess is what they're saying, that policy no longer applies to everybody?
No, let's understand something. The police chief and the mayor don't have the right to just decide what laws they're going to enforce and what laws they're not. I mean, that's the whole point. And so the question is, if we have laws which say that you're not allowed to stay here at night, then they need to be enforced or they need to be changed. I mean, it doesn't make any sense So I understand the group. They're upset about a lot of individuals and a lot of politicians in the country who haven't obeyed the law and got the country in trouble. Well, there's a lot of evidence of that. But you don't solve that by going around and asking for special treatment and have people not enforce the laws which on the other side of the fence. This is a very easy thing to do if you take your job seriously. Either we have a policy or we don't have a policy. If we have a policy, it's enforced. If we don't have a policy, you develop one. It's not really that difficult.
Good. Okay, let's get a two-shot. You got a question?
Yeah. How would you suggest that we get our voices heard then? If we can't stay in the park, if you're saying we're not following the law by staying in the park.
Oh, are you or you're not following the law? Do you know? Do you know whether you're following the law or not?
I know right now I'm kneeling in the park. At this particular moment, I'm most definitely following the law.
Legal.
Expressing my voice is most definitely following.
That's separate. That's separate. Expressing your voice.
Well, I'm assembling in a park.
Well, I understand that, but if you're not, as we know, you're not supposed to be in this particular park after dark. That's the rules of the city.
Right here where we're standing, and where all these structures right here are assembled. This is not considered part of the park.
Are we sure?
I'm almost positive. Am I right?
Again, if you're
legal,
but there's plenty of people over here in the park. There's plenty of people over in the park.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this point here.
You want to go? We're talking about the occupation.
No, we're not splitting hairs here. We're trying to have a general discussion and move the thing forward. So, and if there is the city policy, it needs to be enforced. If people want to change the policy, the city council can change the policy.
So will they is the question.
But you're not going to solve anything if you just decide that because you don't like certain people who violated certain laws, that you're going to then decide what laws you want to enforce. You either follow the law or you don't follow the law. If you don't like the law, you can change it. The city council can change the policy. It's not particularly complicated. And under city charter, they can change it fast if they need to. If the mayor thinks that the current law, which apparently he does, is not the law he likes, he doesn't have the right to just decide not to enforce it. That's not the... In fact, as I understand it, that's one of your complaints, that you've had politicians just decide what laws they are going to enforce and not enforce relative to Wall Street. Well, the same standard has to apply. The double standard doesn't get us...
But how do we solve anything? That's the question I'm asking. How do we solve anything if we act within the confines of the law? We can't do anything. Our voices are completely silent.
I don't know. That's just not true.
You said you got a question?
If I could, please.
Sure.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm a resident and a small business owner in Richmond,
Great.
and I'm part of this movement.
Great.
And I was just curious. I appreciate you coming down here and seeing for yourself what's going on here. And I understand that you view this as an illegal act here. I was wondering.
I view it as my position is, if the law of Richmond, if that's the policy that you're not supposed to be here encamped after night, it needs to be enforced. If you want to change the law, because as I understand it, that's part of what you're trying to complain about, that certain people didn't enforce the laws relative to Wall Street. Well, how you can't change the standard for you?
I understand that. I think you've made that very clear, and I just want to thank you for paying so much attention to laws that are being broken. I was wondering, have you gone to the Federal Reserve with cameras on you, or to any of these banks around here, and talked to them on camera about the laws that they've broken? Because it seems like the disrespect for law that you're talking about started at the top.
Oh, God.
It's not
Really?
down here.
Well, I'm here because I was invited here by Channel 6.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They want to.
So they wanted an event to showcase.
Well, you'd have to ask Mark what he is.
Sensationalism.
Why don't you want to talk about this, and this is where it's going on.
Okay.
And these are, as I explained to the people who were listening earlier, these are the exact conversations that the mayor's office, the police chief, the public safety city council, they have to make a decision about this, because what's going on here is raising all these questions.
But it seems like the last time we're talking about large financial institutions that basically held this country hostage if we didn't bail them out. And nobody was talking about politicians making like firm decisions towards these institutions. They just
No,
caved
nobody
into them.
said.
They just
Nobody
caved
said.
into them. Okay, I'm trying to point
Nobody.
out a double standard.
I don't think there's a double standard there.
Okay.
People have been talking about it.
It looks different from this
People have been talking about it for several years. This is not like it hasn't come up. People have been talking about Wall Street and big financial interests and how they affect the country. If you read the history of the country, the Populist Party in the late 1800s was formed in part because the farmers in the Midwest felt that the big railroads, which were dominated by Wall Street interests, weren't giving them a fair price for their product, which is in fact
And
true.
I understand that William Jennings Bryan broke a few laws in his time too, just as Martin Luther King did to make a point in his time.
And no one's suggesting you don't have these rights, okay? And in fact, that's correct. You can have civil disobedience, and I marched against the Vietnam War too, so I understand that. So the issue is not whether you have the First Amendment rights or the rights to express yourself. The question is, if the city has a policy that you can't camp here at night, that doesn't affect your First Amendment rights generally. No one says you can't march in the street, you can't be here during the afternoon, you can't, perhaps you can sit in someplace else.
I think you could make an argument against that.